Stage 7 of the Cambridge Latin course introduces us to the supernatural and Roman beliefs in life after death. It opens with fabula mirabilis, a story based upon a famous tale from a novel by the Roman writer Petronius, and like all good ghost stories, it's told in the past tense. For that, we need a quick recap of two Latin past tense verb endings. Students that follow the Cambridge Latin course will be very aware that for the first 5 stages of the course, it chugs along at a fairly steady state in terms of new language grammar acquisition. But then stage 6 introduces to two past tense verbs all at once, whereas previously we're dealing with just verbs in the present tense happening now. Those two past tenses are the imperfect and the perfect. As you can see here, the focus on the perfect tense, but real quick recap, the imperfect tense and those familiar bam, bas, bat, barmus, bartis, ban endings tells us that something was happening or things used to happen or were happening in the past over a period of time, but remained incomplete. The perfect tense, on the other hand, deals with events that were essentially done and dusted, completed. As with all Latin verbs, it's comprised of two parts, the stem and the ending. The stem is the part of the verb which contains the root meaning, and the endings, of course, indicate what person or thing completed the action. I've just highlighted here in green and red a couple of clues that will often guide us towards the perfect tense. The letters in green comprise the end of the perfect stem, and what we're looking for here is these letters that almost spell V Sussex. It's just an additional clue that we're dealing with the perfect tense, but the actual endings themselves, of course, fairly distinctive. But just have to be learned individually, perhaps as a rhyme. E istiit, imus istis errant. By no means do all Latin verbs give us this sort of double clue to indicate the perfect tense. And perhaps the most common verb that doesn't is the perfect tense of video. Video means I see. Vidi, I saw. Of course, the weed bit of the perfect stem doesn't end with any of those letters, V Sussex, and there are others. But as with most sort of rules, there are exceptions. So it's not by no means a perfect indicator of that tense. For those slightly more visual learners, this is a really brief slide just to try and demonstrate by way of a sort of simple formula how those perfect stems are formed. You don't see in any dictionary, of course, these sort of exploded versions of a verb, but I've just tried to separate the different component parts for the sake of ease, really. So spectare, to watch, the perfect stem spectav, the verb to fear, timere, timu is the perfect stem, and mitto, I send, the perfect stem mis. Onto these perfect stems, which in these cases do adapt one of the letters of V Sussex, but of course, as I said before, it's by no means a comprehensive rule. You just clip on the endings, the different person endings, to indicate who or what completed that action. An example of a verb which adapts the double S, which has not been included in these 3 examples here, iubere, is to obey. The perfect stem, ios, iosi, I obeyed, iosisti, you singular, obeyed, iosit, iosimos, iosistis, ioserant, to indicate he, she, or it obeyed, we obeyed, you plural obeyed, and they obeyed. I'll also highlight, of course, the verb that we dealt with before, videre, to see. The perfect stem does not entertain any of these letters here, so it's just something that we've got to be mindful that the rule isn't a perfect one. Here then is the tale fabula mirabilis, meaning a wonderful or strange story. As mentioned earlier, this story is a very famous part of a wider novel by the 1st century AD writer Petronius, who was for a while a favorite of the Emperor Nero, but like many people that got too close to the emperor and thereby earned the jealousy of other people, he was brought down supposedly through plotting against the emperor, and whether or not he was is irrelevant. When he realized that his death was required, he beat the emperor to it and opened his own veins in the bath, supposedly then entertaining guests. And in the process of bathing, he's supposed to have broken a fluorspar, a crystal, a very expensive wine dipper, just to spite the emperor so that he couldn't himself have it. This version you see here is a very sort of condensed version of that story. but no less entertaining for all that. The main thing to really look out for here is to make sure that the perfect and imperfect tense verbs are all spotted before translating them. There's nothing more frustrating really for teachers and examiners than seeing that an otherwise very capable, or clearly very capable student has done really well with a translation, only to throw away easy marks by clearly just being careless with verb tenses, having done all of the hard work. Right, straight into it then. We see in the first sentence an example of an imperfect tense verb, bant, keinare, to dine. There has to be present in that translation the word were to get over the sense of the imperfect tense. Were as opposed to was, because of course bant is plural, third person plural. There's another example of an imperfect tense verb in the following sentence there, aderat. Now I said before that the imperfect tense verbs are very easy to spot because of these endings bam, bas, bat, meaning I was, you were, he, she, it was performing, whatever the verb is, and that's absolutely true. There is unfortunately, however, one exception to that rule, and it's the very common and very irregular verb to be, esse meaning to be and sum meaning I am. Aderat is just a different version of that. It's basically a compound verb, and by compound I mean that a prefix in this case has been added just to slightly adapt the meaning. Add some meaning I am present. The opposite, while we're at it, is ab some meaning I am absent, I'm away. Here we see aderat. There's no sight, of course, of bam, bas, bat, but that's because the verb to be in the imperfect tense goes differently. It's the only verb that does, and all compound versions of it perform the same. Eram, eras, erat. I was, you were, he, she, it was. Eramus, eratis, erant. We were, you were, they were. So aderat, he, she, it was present. The he, of course, refers to Felix. So it's got to be a he, not a she here. In the next sentence, we see laudar werent there. The V coming at the end of the perfect stem, laudav, showing that, of course, that is one verb that does obey the V suffix rule we mentioned. So perfect stem plus plural ending, third person plural, the they ending. Laudare meaning to praise. See another example of a perfect stem, a verb ending its perfect stem ending with another V, keinar. I know I'm eliminating it there, but it should be highlighted. Keinarverant, once again, erant meaning they. Caecilius clamavit, another verb there ending perfect tense ending in a V. Then we have a couple of questions raising the alarm, as it were, for a guy that features within this story, decens. Once again, we see in here adest, that version of the verb to be, the compound version of it there. Slight change of tack, still a perfect ending. Misit, we've mentioned that verb before. Mittere meaning to send, and another verb which has a V at the end of that perfect stem, quaesivit in this case. Quaerere, not in this otherwise very generous list of glossed verbs here, glossed words. Quaerere, to seek, to look for. We get the word query from it. Then we've got in the next sentence, postquam servus e villa discessit. Discessit is one of those slightly rarer verbs, the perfect stem for which ends with that double S. Discedo, I go away. So to you to work out, of course, what the discessit version signifies. And then the next, we've also got another perfect tense verb in hausit, haurere, to drain, to finish off, and finally another perfect tense verb, narro, with narrare. You probably already know means to tell, as in to tell a story, get the word narrate from it. So nothing particularly difficult so far. There's a preponderance there, of course, of perfect tense verbs. So the expectation is, of course, the tense is correctly conveyed there. There follows the main sort of chunk of the story here, which is, as I say, the condensed version of the story that's found in Petronius's book, the Satyricon, which is incidentally one of the only 2 novels from the Roman literature that has survived. The Satyricon survived almost intact, not quite. What I would forewarn here is not to try and second guess the story. It is a tale of the supernatural, and so unsurprisingly, it's got 1 or 2 little twists in the tale. Don't try and translate and then think that something sounds a bit odd and try and put it into a more sort of sensible form. Just sort of, part of the joy of the story really is that it's very unusual, got an unusual twist at the end of it. There's nothing particularly difficult within it, as long as you're on the lookout for these different verb tense endings. And in fact, we do get, probably for the first time really in the Cambridge Latin course, a really quite atmospheric little sentence here. You wouldn't expect, of course, a story of this nature to be set in the broad daylight, so there you have it. And we even got an example of some onomatopoeia here. You're possibly familiar with that through English literature or language lessons, which of course to create a sense of the meaning of the word by how that word actually sounds. Ululare, to howl, as it's glossed here. And if you don't believe me that that's the noise that wolves make, then by all means look at YouTube and see for yourself. A nice little story then in summary. And it's worth spending a bit of time over and not trying to rush through, because it is very rewarding, not just in terms of the actual story itself, but in terms of practice for these past tense verbs. Good luck.